Please join me in welcoming the Bowtie Economist, Dr. Elliot Eisenberg.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. It really is. And I have to begin with an apology. You bring me to a nice place. It's a beautiful city. I've been here once or twice before. I enjoyed myself on both occasions. I remember it well. And you come to see me, and my conversation sort of begins at meh and kind of tails off from there. So I'm the messenger. I'm not the mess. Don't blame the messenger. But I get it. Let's begin. Look. So this is, I got to turn this thing on without myself. Oh, it's on. So this is GDP. You had a class in high school or college, maybe you don't remember. You talked about all the goods and services produced in the United States. How big is our economy? How fast is it growing? And so on and so forth. There are 4 parts. The first one's C. It's the single most important one. It's 70% of GDP. The second one's I, corporate investments in plant and equipment. The third is government spending. The last is exports minus imports and brackets. C is fine right now, despite rising rates, high inflation, and all that stuff. Consumers are spending their friggin' brains out. I think this slows down considerably going forward. We're going to essentially run out of money. That's what's going to happen here. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to be disastrous, but I think C weakens. The second term is I, corporate investments in plant and equipment. It's about 14 or 15% of GDP. It's already weakening. Firms are spending less on plant, they're spending less on equipment, they're certainly not increasing inventories with a few exceptions anymore, because inventories have returned and supply chains have gotten better. And now with higher rates and unemployment expected to rise and a recession probably on the horizon, it's not really an opportune time to spend money investing in plant and equipment. So I is already weakening. The third term is G, government spending, another 14 or 15% of GDP. And it's weakened substantially. The budget deficit from 2021 to 2022 fell by half. It went from 2.8 trillion to 1.4 trillion. This is the good thing. This is because COVID's over. I mean, look at the room. We're all here. No one's wearing a mask. We've all had COVID 2 or 3 times. I've had 37 shots. I've run out of body places to put the injection down. I'm doing like the drug dealers, behind your knees and your elbows and under your armpits and so on. Not that I know about this, but so it's weakened. Now the good news is it's not going to weaken further. We'll talk about that a bit. The last term is exports minus imports, not terribly important. They bounce around a lot. I think they're generally going to weaken over time as the global growth slows and the dollar's pretty strong. It's weakened a bit, but it's pretty strong. Let's look at the details. So this is the first slide I want to show you. This is total spending. It's 70% of GDP. It's by far the most important thing. If this thing turns south, we're toast. So far, utterly no indication of turning south. Despite all the bad news, the high rates, the supply chain problems that we had, and on and on and on, consumers' income's not keeping up with inflation. Consumers are spending. Take your finger, preferably the middle finger, and cover up the ditch that's COVID. You won't even notice it's there. It's like consumers, why? Why? What happened? So when COVID comes, monetary policy becomes ridiculously easy, right? Interest rates go to 0. So money's cheap, plentiful, whatever. Fiscal policy becomes crazy expansionary. Congress starts giving us checks. Biden, President Trump first, then President Biden. They overstimulate us. We don't need the money, it turns out. But they think of the prior recession in 08, the housing bust, and the one before that, the dot-com bust. And those were demand-led recessions. So they say, let's give people money so they can demand stuff. Turned out that was the completely wrong thing. It was the wrong war. They fought the last war like all the generals did. You think back to World War II, and the French were building the Maginot Line. So what did the Germans do? They went around. I mean, it's friggin' brilliant, right? So this has been terrifically strong, but it's going to weaken, and here's why. This is household net worth. You see the top? It's coming down. If you look here, right before COVID started, it was where the cursor is right now. And then COVID comes and it falls by $6 trillion overnight. Within a month, $6 trillion. That's back in March, late March of 2020. When COVID comes, the government closes the economy down. No one knows what's going to happen. I'm afraid to go out of my house. I wear a mask outside when I'm walking alone to protect myself. Every time I blow my nose, I wash my fingers thinking it's helping me. I washed every tuna fish can thinking I'm going to get contact COVID and die. It was all wrong, but no one knew. Anyways, then interest rates go to 0.
the economy gets stimulated through fiscal policy and monetary policy. And because interest rates go to zero, the everything rally occurs, right? The stock market goes crazy, the bond market goes crazy, house prices go nuts, used car prices, new car prices, hell, everything. You collect Ford Pintos and now each one's worth $500,000. I mean, everything went bonkers. So if you look at the divot at the lowest point on the far right of the graph to the top, that's an increase of $40 trillion. And it occurred in 7 quarters when interest rates were zero, right there. $40 trillion from there to there. Well, of course we could afford a second home, a third car, go on. You could do whatever you want as long as you didn't leave your house, right? You couldn't travel, you couldn't go to a dentist, you couldn't go to a doctor, you couldn't get your hair cut, but you could spend $100,000 and buy a car. And that was COVID. It was crazy. We stopped going baseball, basketball, ballet, nothing, football, forget about it. But we could spend $40 trillion. And that drove our economy, but now it's going into reverse. Why? Because the Fed's raising rates. And the Fed wants you to be miserable. The Fed wants you to curl up in a little ball under your desk, close the lights, and cry. It wants you to have a mini nervous breakdown because it wants you to stop spending because unemployment's too damn low and that's causing wages to go up. So wealth is declining, number one. Number two, what am I aiming at? This one. This is savings rates. So where's the computer? Is it right here? Is this right, maybe nothing? Yeah. So this is savings rates. Look at savings rates, bottom right-hand corner. 2.4% last month, up from 2.1 the month before. These are fantastically low rates of savings. They've never been this low. The lowest we ever had before was 2005. And in 2005, it was because there was a housing bubble that was created by a credit bubble. How many of you have a dog? Your dog was getting credit card offers. Different dog, it's too long ago, but if you had a dog now, you probably had a dog then too. My daughter was 9, she had a $100,000 line of credit on like 7 credit cards. It was ridiculous. So you didn't have to save, and you also got a 110% mortgage in those days. Well, 110% mortgage, you have to save. And you had an option not to pay your mortgage that month. Well, option only, no doc, liar loans. They encourage no need to save. But this is different. This is now, we're not saving because the cost of buying milk and gas and rent and all that stuff has gone way up. Our incomes aren't keeping up with inflation, so we're saving less money. That's not a great sign. It isn't the end of the world, but it's not. This means there's not a lot of gas left in the tank, right? The next thing is credit cards. Blue is credit cards. Red is auto loans and student loans, so it's a very different thing that's going on. But blue is credit cards, and look at the credit cards, and look at the first bump in 2008, 2009. It took about 10 years for credit card balances, forgetting about inflation, to return to where they were. Right here, same thing. It took about 8 or 9 years. Look now, it took 1.5 years, and they're rising again. We have built up so much wealth, and yet we're relying on credit cards. And the interest rate on credit cards is going up, right? It was 17%, now it's 23 or 24. That's at the average rate of our credit card balances now. So we're saving less, our wealth is down, we're saving less, we're using credit cards more. And this is real incomes, this is real hourly compensation. It's below zero, it's declining at 3-4% a year. Our incomes are down because inflation's exceeding our income, exceeding wage growth, and we're also on average working a little less. This seems to be a permanent feature. We want to work a little less. It's not that we're sharing the work among other people. There's a desire to work less. So incomes aren't keeping up. That's why we're going through our savings. That's why we're doing all these things, using credit cards and so on. This is not a particularly great story. It's not disastrous, but it's not great. And on top of that, look at the big blue blob. The big blue blob is excess savings generated because of COVID. You had nowhere to go during COVID. What's your name, Pam? You were going to go travel the country or travel the world. You had a big thing, global, around the world, go to Peru. I'm making it up, but you couldn't go. You had this 30 or 40,000 bucks. You were going to take your kids or your nieces or your brother or I don't know what, your ex-husband, maybe you're married, I don't know. And then suddenly you can't go. You have all this money. So in some cases you spend some, but you invest some, you save it, whatever. This savings peaks out at over $2 trillion, right in the middle of 21, after we get the third stimmy check, the first one from President Biden, $1,400. And you can see what happens afterwards. It slowly is falling down because we're going through it. So we're burning through our savings, we're using more credit cards, our incomes aren't keeping up, and our wealth is declining. This is essentially households using their balance sheet to stay alive. That just doesn't sound good. Now, there are saving graces here. Wage growth is wage growth is still pretty good, and inflation's falling. So it's possible that if inflation gets below wage growth, then real wages start to go up. That would be lovely. That's entirely possible. The other thing is job growth gets better. Okay, that's not going to happen. Job growth is going to get worse because we're raising interest rates and job growth is sinking, and soon unemployment will start to rise. We can argue how much it's going to rise, but it will rise. Some people who are very optimistic think it rises from 3.5 to 4. The Fed says 3.5 to 4.5, 1 percentage point rise, and I think 3.5 to 5.5. And I'll explain to you why I think they're all out to lunch. But at the end, it could be me out to lunch. Either way, unemployment's going to rise. That's not going to help wages all that much. So there's some things that can ameliorate this problem, but there's a lot of problems out there to begin with. None of them are wildly serious, but they're all add up to a weakening consumer situation. Now, let's go back. There's good news too. The good news is oil prices. Oil prices were a major source of inflation over the last while. And if you look at the graph starting in 2020, the very bottom of 2020, when oil prices averaged a month at $20 a barrel, they go up in relatively short order to almost $115 a barrel, right? They start out down there at $20 and they go up to about 115, 120. When you have a steady increase like that, that generates inflation. And that's what drove Biden to use the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to deplete it, to send oil out there, to increase the supply of oil, driving down the price for a very inelastic good, like corn, wheat, soybeans, right? Little increases or little decreases and prices go bonkers. Oil's exactly the same. That causes inflation. But if it just moves around like it does between 2010 and 2015, no one cares. I think oil's now largely in that situation. The two big wild cards for oil going forward is China's reopening and how much better their economy will get and how fast it will happen. And we don't really know. And the other question is, how much more will U.S. frackers produce? U.S. frackers have been very responsible in drilling. They've been drilling very little, and they've been buying back shares, paying dividends, and making shareholders very happy because the frackers blew, $300 billion between 2012 and 2020. And Wall Street told them, guys, get it together. We don't care how many barrels you produce. We want money from you. That's all we care about. But if prices get high enough and demand gets strong, they may lose control over that. But we'll see. But it's hard to imagine oil prices getting much above 80, 90, $100 a barrel. They'll bounce around, yeah, whatever. Who really cares? Natural gas prices similarly. The days of $3 natural gas for 1 million BTUs is probably history because European demand is now very strong because the Europeans have cut off the Russians. So there's now a global reorientation of where natural gas is traveling. But it's hard to imagine it staying at $8 or $9 a million BTUs as well. So, think 5, 6, 7, that seems pretty reasonable. There's a big swing there, I get it. But oil and gas are not going to be inflationary. That's the important thing. They may be high. Remember, inflation is not the price of something. Inflation is the change in the price in something. I'm not saying car prices will return to where they were or egg prices will come back to where they were, although that's a whole separate story because of avian flu and 50 million birds being killed, right? But I'm saying the prices aren't going to keep going up that much. So oil's not going to go up much in this cycle. And because of that, well, not because, but in part because of that, and because we have satisfied our demand for goods, having bought goods in record amounts because we couldn't buy services during COVID. We bought Pelotons, TV sets, Sub-Zero refrigerators, pergolas, pavers for the backyard to watch the big game with your friends outside without a mask. Our demand for stuff is now coming down. The price of energy is coming down. And look at the cost of transportation. This is the cost of shipping something from Shanghai to LA. It's now exactly where it was pre-COVID. If you look at the peak when it was almost $13,000, That was because all those ships were off the ports of LA and Long Beach. If there are 120 ships or something, those ships are all gone now. Not because the ports of LA and Long Beach are efficient, God forbid. No, they're not. It's our demand is reduced. The ships are now going a bit to Savannah and a bit to Charleston and New York and Houston and wherever. But our demand for stuff has gone down. The price of new cars last month fell for the first time. The price of goods is calming down. The price of energy is coming down. The price of food's not going up. There really are deflationary tendencies out there that's good, that's pushing inflation down legitimately. That's good news. The question is, how much more will this fall? I think quite substantially, but it's how low will it get? No one really knows. And how fast will it fall? No one really knows. I could tell you 12 stories here. I just simply don't know. We'll discuss this more. But that's the million-dollar question. How fast and how low? If it falls fast and low, we probably avoid a recession because the Fed can lower rates quicker and we're done. If it happens slowly, that's not so hot. And what type of inflation? We'll discuss this more. But energy, transportation, goods are deflationary and food is no longer inflationary. Now, supply chains. They're done. Supply chains are fixed. There's a couple reasons why. Firms have invested in things. Our demand for stuff has reduced, right? This is prices. This is put out a monthly survey by the Institute of Supply Management. They ask purchasing managers, PMIs, how do you feel? You taking Prozac today? You know, is supply chain working? Is it a problem? See, here's prices paid. If it gets below the blue line like it is right now, the prices paid for inputs into manufacturing are declining. Now, they went up a lot here. A little decline is not going to bring them back to where they were. And the Fed doesn't want to get prices back where they were. That would be massively deflationary, and that would not be helpful. Wouldn't mind a little bit getting back where they were to some extent. But this is telling you that there's no problem with supply chains because input prices are coming down literally, right? Here's another measure. This is new orders. Look at the top right. Look at export orders. This is suggesting something's changing in the mood music here, right? The globe is slowing. Europe, it looked like they were going to go into a nasty recession. It looks like now they're probably not. Largely because of the cost of energy. Largely because the weather's warm. I'm not kidding you. But they got lucky. Putin tried to screw them by withholding energy from them. And the weather gods cooperated. Moreover, the wind gods of, who's the god and goddess of the wind? I don't remember. But the winds are good too. A year ago, Europe had no wind, they had no water, they were in deep trouble. Had last year been now, Europe would be in a world of hurt, but they're doing fine, thank you very much. But nonetheless, the globe is slowing, our imports are slowing, demand for our stuff is reducing, our dollar is strong, but you can see here, there's no problem. Orders are going away because we have enough stuff. Goods are no longer the issue. There are exceptions, cars remain a problem, and automotive stuff remains a problem, but generally speaking, it's not much of a problem anymore. This is inventory to sales ratios. This is where the rubber hits the road. And I like to look at the one on top, which is in yellow or gold color. It's the retail inventory to sales ratio. That's when I walk into a store and I want to buy a t-shirt. I go to a store called T-Shirts or Us. We have no t-shirts. I'm really sorry. Your store says you sell t-shirts. No, we don't have any. How about Payless shoes? Sorry, no shoes. When you go to the store and you can't get what you want, the price gets very expensive very fast because you want whatever it is. But when you can get it, it's no longer expensive. So if you look at my favorite orange color, look at the very bottom on the right. When it hits 1.1, the inventory to sales ratio hits 1.1. You got a big problem. This guy's leaving. He's so upset at what I talked about, the inventory to sales. Thanks for the warm cyclone welcome. Yeah. May the bad weather clobber you in 3 hours. I'm not bitter. So let that be a warning. You get to 1.1 over here, you got a problem on your hands. You have massive inflation. But look now, it's coming back up. And this includes automobiles. If I exclude automobiles, we're almost back to normal. Apparel, those sorts of things, they've all returned to normal. Stores like Tuesday Morning or those discount stores, the TJ Maxx and so on, they're all full. Burlington Coat Factory, they're all full of garbage you don't really need anyways. because they overbought last year in the spring thinking their supply chains weren't going to work, and then they work, and now we bought so much clothing we don't want it. I mean, it's all a hit or miss proposition, but there's plenty of stuff. So goods inflation, energy inflation, transportation inflation. Despite all this good news, however, we're not happy. We're fundamentally not happy. Our incomes generally aren't keeping up with inflation. Interest rates are rising. The fear of a recession is palpable. I think a couple of surveys, I've read a whole bunch of surveys on this, and the number of people who think there'll be a recession, like CEOs and C-suite people and stuff like that, they're thinking it's like somewhere between 65 and 95% of those people all think we're going to get a recession. Doesn't mean we will, but it's pretty likely. So look at consumer confidence on the far right. It's not absolutely atrociously rotten, but it's pretty damn close. So we're not feeling good. Maybe this is aberrant. Maybe this survey is just plain wrong. Look at the next slide. This is the Institute of Supply Management, manufacturing. Now we're not talking to the supply managers now. Now we're looking at what the business is doing. How well is the business performing? Look on the far right top slide. It's below 50. You're below 50, you're in recession. Manufacturing is in recession right now. Data came out yesterday from the New York Fed. There are 5 Fed banks. There are 12 total Fed banks. 5, New York, Philly, Kansas City, Dallas, and there's one more I can't remember, Richmond, that put out monthly manufacturing surveys. They survey a survey of all the manufacturing facilities in their area. Usually like it's a couple of states, maybe, it depends on where they're located. It's below, data came out for New York yesterday, it was horrendous. It was flat out awful. Manufacturing is clearly in a recession. You ask why? First, we bought tons of manufactured goods during COVID because we had to compensate and buy something, make ourselves feel good. We're stuck at home, nowhere to go. Oh, let's buy a new pair of shoes or something. And secondly, COVID accepted, when recessions happen or the fear of a recession starts, you can stop buying manufactured goods. You don't need manufactured goods, Joey. You need to buy a car tomorrow. You can wait. You can get the pistons fixed or the whatever it is, the alternator repaired or whatever it is. You need to buy a refrigerator. Unless your refrigerator is broken and you can't repair it, you can let it go on a few months longer. Let's suppose your kid's in college, hopefully here, is a clone, right? God forbid they're a Hawkeye. I'm kidding. Nice place. I've been there. They were nice to me too. I have to pander a little bit because you're not going to say, well, I'm not going to send my kid to college because there's too much pressure on the economy and I want to reduce education expenses. Kids stay home for a year. Or, God forbid, you need chemo or something. Oh, well, I don't want to go to a hospital because it's too expensive and I want to reduce stress on the healthcare system. You need a haircut, you're going to get a haircut. So people tend to keep up with their expenditures on services, reduce them on goods at a sign of something being bad. Think about it. Kyle, there's a 30% chance you're going to lose your job in 6 months. I did not talk to your boss. It's not true. I just made it up. You have to make a decision. You're either going to take your favorite economist out to dinner, Chateaubriand for 2, nice place, good music. It'll cost a couple $100. Or you're going to buy a Ferrari for $300,000. You have a 30% chance of losing your job in 3. What's it going to be? You're taking me to dinner. Of course, you'd like to buy the Ferrari, but you're not. That's why manufacturing goes into recession. At the possibility of a recession. So look at this data. You see in 08, we have a big divot. That's the housing bust. Then we have 3 small ones and then COVID. Those 3 small ones show us that you can have a manufacturing recession without it leading to an overall recession, because manufacturing is 10, 12% of GDP, depending on how you measure it. It's output or wages or whatever, right? Employment, whatever. So I'm not so concerned. I'm nervous, don't get me wrong, because housing's also in recession now. So you got 3 or 4% here, and you got 8, 9% there. This is beginning to mount. Look at the next slide. This is where I begin to have real heartache. This is services. This is a huge percentage of GDP, and 2/3 of consumer spending is on services. And it, last month, went below 50. I'm not prepared after 1 month of crappy data to say services are in recession too, but if they are, we're hooked. Because services don't go into recession often. It takes a lot for us to say, oh, I'm not going to go to school. I'm not going to go out to eat. I'm not going to go to a restaurant. I'm not going to go to a bar. I'm not going to go to a ballet or a basketball game. That's a much bigger deal. Those are smaller purchases that really make life enjoyable. They're fun, right? Replacing your roof, not so much fun. You can repair it and wait. But going to a sporting event or whatever it is, that's fun. Or opera or whatever makes you happy is fun, right? So this in a recession is making me nervous. I'm watching that very, very closely. Then there's small business. Probably a large chunk of you are in that category of small business. Owners are working for a small business. I think 500 people is a definition of small business. And you can see over the last couple of years, it's gone steadily down. To give you some reference points, this here in the middle, going up is Trump winning the election. We were happy, new president, tax cuts, yay, we got them. And then just right around that 2020, right, that's COVID coming, gonna kill us, makes us unhappy. The decline here is roughly the same size as the COVID decline or the increase that resulted from President Trump winning the election. We are not happy. Inflation's high, hard to get workers, hard to get supplies, recession's coming, rates are rising. Small business is just plain not happy. So we have households that aren't happy, we have small business that's not happy, we have manufacturers that are in recession, we have service providers that seem to be teetering on the possibility of a recession, that's not good. And then we have CEOs. I know a couple CEOs here. I know here my woman who introduced me here. You're a CEO, the boss. I spoke to you guys here. You're the bosses here. You're the bosses. You three people, I'm picking on you because I know you. You're not happy. You read the data. You read the Wall Street Journal, the Investor Business Daily. You get into the field information. You're feeling crappy. If we could just convince you to be happy, the problem might go away. So maybe we should start in the corner after we should all roll a joint. Is it legal? I don't know. It's not legal. We should never do it. Don't break the law. I've never in my whole life ever smoked. I don't know what it's even like. But if we did, I bet the three of us would be happier. The mood music would change. You'd hire more people. Things would. If you look at the economy here today, it's these three people you have to blame because look at the CEOs. Look at it. Every time it goes down. This is Paul Volcker raising rates to 12 million%. This is the S&L crisis, liquidity crisis, which led to the S&L crisis, or vice versa. Then there's 2000, the dot-com bust. Okay, that's the housing bust. That's COVID. Friggin' 5 for 5. The CEOs are just unhappy. Give them a bag of Coke or something. They're not happy. So you look across CEOs, small business, manufacturers, service providers, households, a combination just not a happy bunch of people here because the headwinds are strong. It doesn't mean we're going to have a recession. I think we will. That said, and this is critically important for you, I don't think it much matters if we have a recession or not. The issue is we'll grow slow or go fast than what we have now, and it will come down, there is no doubt. If you think about the economy like a 10 being a great economy and 1 being a garbage can economy. If we have a recession, it's a 4, not a bad recession. If we have a soft landing, we avoid a recession, it's a 5 or a 5.5. It's not that big a difference. That's the point. So don't think of, oh, we're going to have a recession. I'm going to walk around in a sackcloth and ashes and pray every day. Go to church there. Or, hey, it's a great, we'll have a soft landing, yay. I'm going to Costco and buy $500 of Dom Perignon champagne and shake it up and splurt around and feel super. Yeah, the differences are small here. The recession will be mild. The soft landing will be weak. It's like, if we have a recession, GDP next year is, for example, negative 0.5%. And if we avoid it, it's plus 1%. I mean, 1% of GDP is not trivial, don't get me wrong, but it's not huge here either, right? This is not big. So don't think of recession or not. Don't think of binary issues here. We're more fluid than that, okay? It'll be what it is, but it's not going to be that big. This is investment in equipment, not plants, but equipment. Blue is real inflation adjusted. It's not going anywhere. Firms aren't eager to invest. They're not going to invest in inventories. That's done. They're not investing in equipment. They may be investing in intellectual property. Can't get workers, you invest more in IP. But the stuff is not, and stores aren't investing in plant isn't so appealing because rates are higher at 7-8%. What made sense at 2 or 3 doesn't make sense at 7 or 8. So that's an issue also. So corporate investment's probably not going to save the day here either, right? This is small business CapEx. Again, this is you guys. So CapEx is being driven by General Motors, and Microsoft, and Amazon, and Google, Facebook. They're wasting their money, but that's a whole separate conversation. They invest tens of billions of bucks. This is small business. So this is like the quintessential small business in my mind is a franchise of like Jamba Juice or something. So for them, do you have a Jamba Juice or a juice place, you know? These guys, what's investments on like a new blender? Costs what, $100? Okay, it's in industrial grade, $200. But even they're pulling and saying, let's use our old stuff more. So they don't want to invest. Big businesses laying off workers. There's nothing dramatically awful. The big firms invested in so many people for so long, like Amazon and Zoom and stuff. There's some payback. Okay, fine. But corporate investment's not going to solve the problem. This is government spending, G, the third term in GDP. And you can see that in 2021 and 2022, there was massively fiscally contractionary policy. COVID money went away and financial conditions got tighter, right? That's the green. But now it's getting better because it doesn't stay bad forever. If you look at year over year, that's how economists look at things. You compare June to June, July to July, and so on, because you get rid of seasonality that way, which is a problem. Fiscal policy was contractionary from 21 to 22, as I mentioned earlier. The budget deficit shrank by 50%. But it's not going to keep shrinking by $1.4 trillion forever. If that happened, we'd have a massive budget surplus. Yeah, good luck on that one. Right? So it ends after a year. Next year, it'll be roughly what it is this year, a little better, a little worse. It's over. That's why this number quickly goes to zero. So by the end of 23, there's no fiscally contractionary policy left. We still have a quarter or two to go in this process in 23, Q1 and Q2. It's still where it's declining. So household spending is super strong, but likely to decline. Corporate investment is weakening. Government spending is weak, but getting less important because it's going away. That's the mood music that we have here. And as a result, that's why I see a mild recession. We'll get into more of it. But if they don't, it doesn't matter. It'll be a mild recovery. It'll be a weak economy with rising unemployment, but still growth. It's a very strange world. Now, let's talk about monetary policy. That's the big elephant in the room. And this graph shows you the last 13 rate hiking cycles done by the Fed. And we're now in the 14th rate hiking cycle. This goes back to 1955, when the economy was vastly different than it was. You look at this graph, of those 13 times, 10 times, there was a recession that ensued. 3 times there wasn't. Those are the most interesting questions. What the hell happened those 3 times? I'm going to tell you it was dumb luck. The 3 times, there's a little purple circle, right? Those are the 3 times we didn't have a recession. What happened? 64, 84, and 94 were the 3 years. When I realized that, I called Jay Powell, my buddy. He doesn't know me. I said, Jay, years ending in 4, no recession, just wait a year and a half. You can raise rates, no recession. He didn't answer my call. What happened? In 64, we had the Vietnam War. So we had very tight monetary policy, but very loose fiscal policy, and they essentially washed each other out. In 84, we had very tight monetary policy, but accidentally very loose fiscal policy, not from the government, but courtesy of OPEC. Oil prices collapsed. Houston and Denver went into the garbage can. In 84, Colorado, or 85 I looked, Colorado was the worst state in the country. Most bankruptcies and most emigration out of the state because the energy companies turned out the lights. That's what they called it. They turned out the lights and they left. And unemployment skyrocketed. So we gave up Texas and Colorado to the economic gods. But in exchange, they gave us 48 really happy states. And we avoided the recession. In 94, it was the internet, I think, that probably did it. The technology improvement changed labor productivity. We invested in equipment and laptops and so on, internet cards and Ethernet stuff and whatever, and things were better. So the 13 times they raised rates, 3 times they got lucky for external uncorrelated factors that protected the economy from recession. This is the 14th time. It'll probably be the 11th recession, but maybe not. We'll see. Again, I don't think it fundamentally matters, but keep this in mind. Rate hiking cycles generally lead to something bad. And in 94, here, the housing market got absolutely clobbered. and manufacturing did too. So even if we escape through the recession, depending on what your sector of the economy that you're in is in, it can still have very deleterious effects. But you don't get great results when there's interest rate hikes. That's why I'm pretty convinced there's going to be a recession. Moreover, this is the yield curve. Don't look at the graph right now. Look at me. We'll get to the graph in a second. I'm better looking anyways. But you know what the yield curve is? The yield curve is the relationship between time and money. And that's the center of what finance is. It's screwing around with time and money. Let me explain. This is the yield curve. On the bottom axis, the x-axis is time. 1 year, 2, 5, 10, 20, 30 years. On the y-axis is interest rates, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6%. The longer you borrow, the more you pay. Make sense? Are there any banks in the audience here? Credit unions? The longer you lend out for, the more you charge. Because there's interest rate risk, credit risk, default risk. If your investors are, say, from abroad, there's currency risk, and there's reputational risk. You end up lending to some guy or woman who does some terrible thing, and oh, they were financed by you. Yeah, right, that makes you look bad. The longer it goes on for, the higher the chance of something bad happening. That's why it's upward sloping. The longer you borrow, the more you pay. The longer you borrow for, the more the bank or credit union charges you. Okay, this is obvious. But occasionally the yield curve inverts. And instead of being upward sloping, it's downward sloping. Okay, when I was introduced to this concept, I was 19 and a freshman in college. I thought my teacher was high on coke. It's like, what do you mean? But open up the Wall Street Journal today and look at the cost of 10-year treasury. It's 3.5%. That's a 10-year borrowing, right? What's 2-year borrowing at? 4.3. What? It's more expensive to borrow money for 2 years than 10 years? Whenever the curve inverts from positive to negative, the blue squiggle goes above the red bar. Aha, okay. Now, I don't know if you can see it here, because the projection may not be really good. Phooey, you can't see it. But every single time you have an inversion, every time with the exception of 66 on the very far left, soon thereafter, a recession follows. 8 for 8. CEOs are 5 for 5. This measures 8 for 8. The yield curve, think of it like a thermometer. You go into a hospital. They give you they take your temperature. Eric, they're like, God, Eric, you have 173. You must be a very sick man. The thermometer is not telling you, it's not making you sick. It's an indicator of something wrong. This is telling you, when you invert, you've got something wrong with monetary policy. It's too damn tight. That's the problem that you've got. And this is likely to lead to a recession. Now, if inflation comes down fast, hard, and deep, we avoid it. But that's, again, historically speaking, unlikely. When they raise rates, you get a recession. When the yield curve inverts, here you can see it on this graph a little bit better. You can see some gray bars, right? Likely. So the next question is, okay, we're likely to have a recession. The next question is, let's go back. So we invert. This curve is the 1 year, you can see on top, the 1 year, 10-year subtraction. I'm taking 1 year minus 10 years. The people are smart asses, and they go, Elliot, you're stupid, because it's the 2 year, 10-year that matters. Maybe it's the 3-month, 10-year. Powell and some presser said, no, it's the 3-month, 18-month that matters. I don't know which one matters. I think it's all stupid, but that's besides the point. So look at this next graph. This next graph looks at every single pair of treasuries that exists. How many of them are inverted? Friggin' 90% of them are inverted. That's a high percentage. Now, the sample size, well, not the sample, the population here is small. We've only had 5 or 6 examples here, right? But we've never skirted away a recession unless this is below 40%. Back in 2000, 1998, we skirted. But here in 1990, here in 2000, here in 2006, and 2020, we had massive inversions followed by recessions. Again, this says we're likely to have a recession. Now, the next question is, when does it start? First rate hike was when? March of 2020, so 10 months ago. The data clearly shows here the average is 2 years. Bottom encircled, 2 years from the start. That means early 24. I don't think so. I think it happens. If it happens, it happens quicker. Why? It happens quicker for the following reason. Watch how fast the Fed has raised rates. Look at the red arrow. That's where the Fed funds rate is right now. Right now. Look at all the other recent rate hiking cycles. This is a ridiculously quick rate hiking cycle. This means that the negative impacts of the interest rate hikes are going to be felt faster. We had last rate hike was a month ago, we had a 50 basis point hike, 0.5%. But before that, we had 4 in a row, 75 bippers, 3/4 of a point each. The Fed raised rates 3.5%, 3% for those 475 bippers, another half, in a space of 24 weeks. We haven't even begun to feel the effects of that yet. Because it takes a while. Yeah, housing has fell, autos normally do, but not now because there were no cars to sell. Now manufacturing is dipping into recession. It takes a while, but there's lags in this monetary policy. The Fed's not claiming that their rate hikes have reduced inflation. Inflation's reduced all by itself because supply chains have gotten better, because our demand for stuff has gone down and people have returned to work and so on and so forth. Now, the next question is, how long will the Fed keep rates up there? Look at the dotted line to the right of the arrow. The longer they keep it up, the more problematic this becomes. Let me give you an example. Just thought of this one yesterday. I'm really proud of myself. Suppose you're a lobster. And someone buys you and looking forward to eating you. You have a problem on your hands. They're going to take you home, put you on the floor, play some games, bet on you with your competitors. And then they're going to plop you into a pot of boiling water. The problem you face is not only the temperature of the water, but the duration of time you sit in the pot. If they dump you in and take you right out, it's very unpleasant, but you probably survive. But the longer you're in the pot, the more likely you are to die. Interest rates are somewhat similar. On the top, that horizontal line just to the right of the arrow, that's you sitting in the effing pot. This isn't going to be pleasant. So hopefully the Fed raises rates, okay, then brings them down fast, okay, we're done. Maybe we skate by. But if they keep them up there for a long time, the economic impact of these high rates affect and infect more and more sectors of the economy. That's why the duration of the hike, the duration of where they keep it at that terminal rate can be terminal for a lot of businesses, okay? So keep this in mind too. It's not just how high, it's how long they keep them up. And they're saying they're keeping them up for a long time. Now that said, Powell and the central bank, they know nothing. They are as ignorant as this this cold pitcher of water. They're as knowledgeable of the future as a bag of cold rocks. A year and a half ago, Powell said, transitory, we're not going to raise rates, no problem. We believed him. Now he says, oh my God, we're going to raise rates, we're going to keep them up for the rest of the century. And we believe him. What, did Powell get smarter? No. Powell just makes up this crap. He's trash talking. After every press release, 2 o'clock after every meeting, they say they're going to raise rates, what are they going to do? And then half an hour later, he gets to a podium as a presser for 45 minutes. He just makes up crap. He doesn't know anything. No one knows the future. So, the Fed funds rate, this is the graph I showed you a few minutes ago. I'm going to digress here for a few minutes, but you're going to laugh at me. Here, this rate right there, this one. Every 3 months when the Fed meets, at every other meeting, they give us the Fed members, 19 members of the Federal Open Market Committee, the group that raises rates, gives us their prognostication of that rate 12 months forward. Right? We know what they think it will be in 12 months. This is the rate they friggin' control. They vote on this damn rate every 6 weeks. They control it. I mean, the markets control it too, don't get me wrong. That's why they get it wrong. But so some economists had too much time on their hands, and they looked at the forecasts of the Federal Open Market Committee members a year in advance, and then compared it to what the rate was 12 months later. And the stupid FOMC members got it right 34% of the time. They got inflation, unemployment, and interest rates right between 17 and 24% of the time. I mean, a dead house plant would do as well as these guys would do. It's not that they're stupid, they're really smart, but no one knows the future. So if they tell you anything, just don't believe it. I mean, don't not believe it, but they're just guessing. Now, how long will the recession be? Not that long. If you look at the center right, you see a 43 months. That was the Great Depression. It was a 13-month recession soon after. That together is the Great Depression. Since the Great Depression, recessions haven't lasted long. I don't think this recession lasts long. There have only been 3 recessions that lasted meaningfully long since the Depression. In 75, because the Arabs wouldn't sell us oil. In 2000, so real prices of assets, buildings had to decline in value, very painful. And there was an embargo. In 2009, house prices had to decline, very nasty. And in the middle, 82, there's a 6-month recession followed by a 16-month recession. Both of those were caused by Paul Volcker. You could say, well, Paul Volcker had to reduce inflation, therefore we got those recessions. That's true. But Paul Volcker had to come up and clean a really bad mess. There were a lot of traveling circuses that came through. Or circuses that came by, and a lot of poop on the ground. They had to clue a lot of, because 15 years of very bad monetary policy. 15 years, 3 central bankers, William McChesney Martin, Arthur Burns, and Bill Miller. All of them essentially incompetent at their task. They had alibis, but nonetheless, they all got it wrong. Volcker has to come in after all these years and clean up a very bad fiscal monetary policy mess. Powell's behind the 8 ball by like 6 or 8 months. Inflation expectations haven't gotten crazy. Unionization rates are much lower. Imports are a much bigger percentage of our economy. Inflation hasn't gotten embedded in our economy like it did in the 70s. It's a big difference. So yeah, it'll be a recession, I think, but it'll be small. So think of a recession coming in June or July. Think of it lasting 12 months and not being all that deep. And hopefully it's a little better than I think, and we skate away and avoid the recession. Let's not talk about labor markets. Everyone bitches about how bad labor markets are. All right, let's look at labor markets. You all can't find workers. The good news is, pre-COVID, we were here, and now we're there. We're up 1.2 million workers, right? We went from here to there. That's great news. But had there been no COVID, extrapolate the line that troughs out in 2010, and it would now be somewhere up there, right? Somewhere up there. So for those people on this side of the room, if you take this line and extrapolate it, it would be somewhere up there. We had a 3.5% unemployment rate there. Now we have a 3.5% unemployment. But that's crazy. Because if we were pre-COVID, we'd have a 3.5% unemployment rate up there. And we'd have 3 million more people working. 3 million more. We're underemployed by 3 million compared to where we would have been had we taken that pre-COVID line and pushed us forward. Okay, that's a risky thing. Extrapolation's dangerous. Yeah, I get it. But this seems like a plausible thing. So what the hell? Look at the unemployment rate. Bottom right-hand corner, 3.5%. Just before COVID, 3.5%. Unemployment today is exactly the same as it was 3 years ago, even though our job numbers are 3 million lower than they should have been. And moreover, look at the 3.5%. That's the lowest unemployment rate since the late 60s in Vietnam War. So our labor markets are tighter than a snare drum. And this is giving the Fed heartburn. Because when unemployment's low, people quit their jobs, tell their boss to go to hell, get a new job, get more money, raise inflation. And that's the crux of the issue right now. This is the center of the Fed's thinking. Now, why is unemployment so low? Because people dropped out of the labor force. That's the problem. So if you look at the next graph, right there, the labor force participation rate on the far right is meaningfully lower than it was just before the precipitous COVID decline. That's the pre-COVID number. It declines, it comes back, but now it's leveled out and it's done. Because now demographics are going to overwhelm it. The number of boomers retiring is getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And the generation after the boomers is very, very small. The Gen Xers, right? Pardon me, right? No one cares about us. We're just a small afterthought. We lost millions of workers. 1 million people died, 1.5 million. Some of those are workers. They're not coming back. I can forecast that perfectly. Some have long COVID. They can't work. So 1 million Americans approximately are so fearful of COVID, they won't go to work. They won't even leave their house as long as COVID exists. Then there's people like you. What's your name? Buffy, who retired. You're so rich. You had so many Ford Pintos in your collection. You own several houses, apartment buildings, whatever. You're retired. And then there's you. What's your name? Norm? And Norm is a manicurist by trade. And during the worst of COVID, I would come in every couple of days coughing my brains out. Can you put a little flour on my thumb, please? He was going to die, so he retired. So people retired because they couldn't afford to risk their lives. People retired because they're rich. People died. People have long COVID. People are afraid of COVID. People want to send their kids to daycare like you. You have 3 kids, but you can't because there's no daycares. 10% of daycare workers aren't back. Oh, you have 4 kids in school, in grade school, but you can't go because the teachers aren't back. We're short 700,000 school teachers right now. So the schools aren't working right. So you can't work because kids are at home. You add up millions of workers. She's leaving now to go to the daycare and pick up her kids because the daycare closes at freaking 9 o'clock in the morning. So this is a real problem. We don't have enough workers. Unemployment's very low. And this is causing all kinds of problems. This graph is a crazy graph. Let me explain it to you. At the peak and left of center, that's the worst of the housing bust. And there are 6.5 workers for every available job. 6.5 unemployed workers for every available job. 6.5. Literally 13 million unemployed Americans as a numerator divided by 2 million jobs. Congress extends unemployment benefits because workers can't find jobs. It's not their fault. There are no jobs to get. Fine. Then it gets better. Falls to 5, 4, 3, 2. Eventually it gets to 1. Back in roughly, 2016, it looks like, right? Maybe 15. When it's 1, that means there's 1 unemployed person and 1 job. So literally 5.5 million unemployed people and 5.5 million open jobs. Okay, the skills don't match, the cities are wrong, they live in Pittsburgh, the jobs are in Detroit or whatever it is. They want computer programmers and these guys are welders or vice versa. You get the idea. The lower the number, the tighter the job market. That's the point. And just before COVID hits, it goes down to 0.8. At 0.8, ballpark, there's 1.25 jobs per person. There are more people than jobs. There are more jobs than people. When it gets that low, I remember telling my friends, if you don't like your job, quit. If you don't think you're getting paid well enough, go to your boss and demand a pay raise. And if they say no, give your boss the finger and tell him he's a F. And then he'll say, oh, you're right. I'm sorry. You deserve the money. Because you have the upper hand. Then COVID comes, rearranges the deck chairs, goes back up to 5. And then it comes down to 4, 3, 2, back to our old friend 1. And then look at that, in the very end of 21, where that troughs out right there, there's now 1 person and 2 jobs. There are 5.5 million unemployed Americans, and there were 11 million jobs. This is a labor market we've never seen before. Workers aren't empowered now, they're overwhelmingly empowered. Now they're asking out the boss's husband or wife. And they're saying, do something about it. And the boss says, it's okay, go ahead. Yeah, I need you to stay. Here's a 10% pay raise. Just keep going out with my family members, but don't leave. That's how tight the labor market is, right? This is unbelievably tight. Now, this guy's gonna get a new job. He's leaving right now. He's walking out. He realized he's been making a mistake all those years. On the very far right, it's declined. Now it's 1.75 jobs per person from 2. This is still super crazy tight. And that's the problem. Wages keep going up. Now, there are 2 problems we have with our labor force. This is immigration. No friggin' immigration. When President Trump came in, he changed a lot of policies. One of them was immigration policy and made it but mentally more difficult to move into the country. Get a green card or a visa, whatever it is. I'm not an expert in the processes. President Biden came in after President Trump. And he reversed a lot of Trump's policies, just as Trump reversed a lot of Obama's policies. As a side note, this is not how to run a country, but I completely digress here. But Biden didn't change Trump's immigration policy. He said, wow, that's a real stinker policy. Let's keep it. So now we have a asinine bipartisan immigration policy. We don't have enough young people. The simple solution is to open up the immigration border, open up the immigration gates a bit. And the compromise is friggin' easy. Close the damn border and make the Republicans happy. And make it easier to immigrate legally and make the Democrats happy. This is a compromise I think almost everybody in this room could probably get around. It's maybe not what you want, but you'll take it. This is compromise and it's politics, especially now when we're crying for workers. If our labor force participation rates don't go up, we are in a world of hurt. Because every time unemployment gets low, wages will go up and the Fed will crank rates. We'll either be in a low growth or high inflation environment. We get to pick, but it's going to be one of those or a combination of the two. Immigration's critical. We need more people, right? That's one. And as a result of this, so many jobs per person and so low unemployment rates and no immigration, so on, we have this graph. And this graph is just plainly upsetting. Look at the blue on the left. At the far left, 2.4% of the population quit their job in 2000 at the peak of the dot-com boom, 2.4. The peak of the housing boom came 7 or 8 years later. It was 2.3 or whatever the number is. And then right before COVID, when unemployment was at its lowest rate in 50 years, it was 2.4. So it was 2.4, 2.3, or 2.2, 2.4. Call it 2.3. When the economy is super strong, 2.3% of the population quit their job every single month. That's like 27, 28%. So you're running a company here. If you're losing like 30 of workers, you're mediocre. Don't sweat the details. Don't let the board beat you. You're saying, oh, that's about average. You know, we're losing 30%. Yeah, no sweat. We're trying to get it at 25 and we're going to declare victory at 25. Right? Yeah, you got it. Look where it is now. So a year ago, it was the top right corner. It was 3%. 3%. We had never seen this before because there were 2 jobs per person. Because there were 2 jobs per person, people were quitting in droves, driving that up to 3. If I didn't know what the unemployment rate was, and all I saw was this graph, I'd say it's well under 3.5 because at 3.5, it was right there pre-COVID, and that was the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years. This means that the unemployment rate associated with 3% quit rates must be one hell of a lot higher. Maybe it's 3 or 2.9 or whatever, much, much lower. 2.9. The unemployment rate's not giving you the good indication of what's really going on. This is a better measure because people quit their jobs not because it's like a Tuesday and it's raining or their boss didn't say good morning to them. They quit their job because they hate their job, their boss is sucky, they've got a better job offer, or they think they can get a better job. Changing jobs and quitting is a big deal. This is voting with your feet. It's a big deal. So now the Fed says we're going to raise rates. Oh, look at this. This is the gap. On the top graph, that's people who quit. They have the intestinal fortitude to leave their old job and they get an 8% pay raise. The losers who stick in their jobs get a 5% pay raise. The gap between the quitters and the stayers is inordinately large. This is telling us we have a labor market problem. There aren't enough workers. And the benefits to quitting are large. And when a lot of people quit, they get more money. And then that wrecks the wage scales of the new company they're working for. Like you're here 10 years and you're making $20 an hour. And what's your name? Just stinky Jason gets here, who works half as hard as you, right? And doesn't know things, and you know everything, and he's making $24, and it's grating the crap out of you, and you go to your boss, Melissa, and say, Melissa, give me $5 because of the crappy Jason's making money, I'm walking or you're paying. And you got a tough choice, because if you lose him, you got to hire someone else, expensive, education, training, blah, blah, or you pay him more. And then he gets mad because he's crappy anyways. And he wants an extra buck to compensate for the humiliation he's experiencing that this slow, lazy sloth is making more than him. I mean, that's the problem he's got in the labor market, right? Thank you both for being good natured. So this is the problem. So listen, now, wages are coming down. The good news, if you're an employer, not an employee, but if you're an employer, is that wage growth is coming down. But pre-COVID, it was about 3%, right? Pre-COVID, it was roughly 3%. It's now well higher. It's got to come back down to 3% if we're going to get 2% inflation. The differential being 1 percentage point, and labor productivity will solve that problem. So we need to get wages down considerably more, but it's hard to get there if unemployment stays super low. Unemployment low is keeping this up. It is declining of late. Let's hope it continues, but it seems unlikely, right? So that's a problem. Now, the Fed's going to raise rates. Before I get there, the Fed's telling us unemployment's going to rise by 1 percentage point because of the increasing interest rates that they've done to us, and they will do to us before they're done. I want to go back and show you a graph you already saw, but you missed the key part of the graph. Now I'm going to give you some nightmares. It's a graph you already saw. It's this graph right here. Look at the graph. Take any trough. The troughs are low unemployment, meaning very strong economies. The Fed says, we're now at a trough on the far right. Fine. The Fed says unemployment's going to go up by 1 percentage point. Look at this graph. Look at any trough you want, going back as far back as 1970. So we have almost 55 years of data here. Show me one increase in unemployment that was just 1%. If you can see it, raise your hands. I'll give you $1 million. Do you see it? No, because once unemployment starts to go up, it starts to go up. That's the problem. To get unemployment only up 1% is almost a miraculous accomplishment. It hasn't happened in the recent past. It doesn't mean it can't. It doesn't mean we're not going to have a recession. Maybe we won't, because China continues to open quickly. The war in Europe ends. Russia floods the world with oil. Price of energy collapses. We open the immigration gates. I mean, things could happen that solve the problem. China opening up is one of them. But to look at this graph and say, I have confidence that unemployment is only going to rise 1%, and then it goes up and you have a recession. Low unemployment causes the Fed to raise rates because they're fearful that that wage rates will go crazy and drive up inflation. So what's the Fed going to do? The Fed's going to raise rates because the Fed shows we have inflation. There is inflation out there. So what's the Fed going to do? The Fed's going to raise rates. So here's the graph of inflation. There's two colors here. Blue is headline inflation, including everything you buy. It's coming down rapidly. The blue is rapidly falling. Good news. But economists don't really care about blue. They look at red. Red excludes food and energy. And you look at me and you go, WTF? How can you exclude food and energy? That's like half of what I spend my money on. Not looking at that, it's like you're missing everything. No, we're not. The reason we're not looking at food and energy, generally speaking, is food and energy prices bounce around primarily because of war and weather. Is U.S. monetary policy going to change simply because they had a drought in New South Wales or a bumper crop in Saskatchewan? That's just stupid. That's not telling us the underlying inflationary pressures here in the U.S. That's telling us that we're importing inflation or importing deflation with a bumper crop or whatever it is. It's a one and done. The weather comes, the weather goes, the war comes, the war goes. It's very rare you have a long war. I mean, I guess you go back to 100 years war, actually 117 years, but that seems inordinately long, a 70 years war. Some of those nasty religious wars in Europe were really long, but wars don't, this Ukrainian thing now, a year, it's already getting to be a long time, So that's one reason. The second reason, and more important in the short run, is that during COVID, energy prices went like that. And because of the war, food prices went like that. So of course, those things are going to reverse. The fact that they're coming down is not informative. That's not going to tell the Fed anything. The Fed cares about the rest of the economy, not the COVID-induced, war-induced booms, and then the subsequent COVID and war-induced busts. They want to look at the rest of the economy. Moreover, the Fed also says, look, energy, goods prices are declining because they went crazy during COVID and now they're going away. So let's ignore goods also. So we're going to ignore food, we're going to ignore energy, and we're going to ignore goods. Then the Fed says, housing prices went bonkers because of COVID and low interest rates. Let's ignore them. This is a lot of the economy. I understand that. But now we're beginning to get at the hard part of inflation. The part of inflation that's probably sticky and is not likely to fall that much. So they're looking at something they call now super core inflation. Again, it's core minus goods minus shelter. I look at a little different number. I'm going to change the red number and look at the number I have now. That's service inflation, just services. Whoa, that's really high. Really, really high, really high. So the blue is coming down, but the red's not, and that's giving the Fed nightmares. So what's the Fed gonna do? The Fed's gonna raise rates in 2 weeks by a quarter point, and then 6 weeks later, they raise it a quarter point more, and then I think they're done, and that's it for the end of the story. That's where we go. And it ends around 5%. Now, that's rent. That's rents right there. They're going way up. We'll look at housing briefly. I don't have a lot of time. I've kind of got to be on my ending here. But suffice it to say in housing, we didn't build enough houses for 10 years. As a result of that, inventory collapsed. As inventory collapses, prices go up. As prices go up, but here, look at the inventory of houses. It's flat. This is inventory here, price appreciation. Inventory hasn't declined. Those black triangles are way out of the normal A range. What's happened is this housing market has gone from super hot, top right corner, to stone cold, bottom right hand corner in 6 months. No one wants to buy a house. People can't afford to buy a house who don't have a house. And if you have a house and you have a mortgage at 3%, you're not selling your house to buy a new house. So there's no move-up buyers and there's no entry-level buyers. There's no buyers. You got a problem on your hands. As a result, like housing sales have friggin' collapsed like a rock. They're going to get a little worse, but not much. They're largely done. You don't get below 4 million units much in this, right? This is pending sales, they suck. This is mortgage purchase applications down 40-45%, they suck. And look at builder sentiment, another measure of likelihood recessionary pressures and tendencies. Whenever the builder confidence declines, like it did in 1990, you get a recession. In 94, we didn't get a recession, but in 2000, we got a recession, and the housing bust in 2008, and then COVID there, and look where it is right now. And like in half an hour, we're gonna get the new number. It'll be lower than this number, by the way. So when unemployment gets low, the Fed raises rates. When home builder sentiment goes up, they raise rates because the economy is performing too well. Happy builders mean inflationary tendencies in the Fed raises rates. It's a harbinger of rate hikes, which generally leads to recession. Single-family construction is falling everywhere across the country. Builders don't want to build, and now they want to ditch their inventory because it's too much, pushing supply up, driving down prices a little bit. And then there's investors who are saying, I don't want to buy a house right now. Because buying a house now, with prices declining, is like catching a proverbial falling knife, as they say on Wall Street. It's just not fun. But this is not 08, 09. Demographically, we're in a very favorable situation. This big hump is the biggest population cohort in US history. They're about to buy a house. Homeowners have lots of home equity, right? Moreover, the cost of building a house has gone way up because the input costs, excluding labor, have gone way up. So builders aren't building enough homes. We are short 4 million houses. We were oversupplied by 1.5 million before COVID, before the housing bust of 08. And look at the median price of a house, the 50th percentile. It's now in the upper yellow, almost $500,000 for the entry, for a median price of a new home. Homes are very expensive. We're underbuilding homes. And will builders build more homes? With what workers? Unemployment and construction super low. And there's the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And there was the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS bill. There's trillions of public money being spent on construction. That's where the workers are going to go. So they're not going to build homes. And then there was a credit bubble. If you look at the top left corner, that's a credit bubble. That's what generated the housing bust, the boom and the bust. Now, at the far right bottom, there's no bubble going on. Homeowners have home equity. You can't get a 110% mortgage. Rents are very high. I think I have a graph coming up here. Oh, this is mobile home prices. You want to survive? Buy a mobile home. But even their price have almost doubled. And a double wide, that's where you'll live, Dan. You'll live a double wide. I love you. So we'll put you a double wide. He complained housing is so expensive, he can't afford to live here. $160,000 for a double wide. No water, no sewer, no land, nonetheless. Refi's weak, yeah, we know that. Remodeling will weaken because interest rates are higher, home prices decline. What's going on locally? 2 or 3 slides. Look, if you don't know where you live, because you didn't go to either Iowa State or Iowa, look at the yellow, look at the graph. This is 8-9 months ago. The economy's strong, everyone's strong. 4 states are a little weak, just a little weak. Look at it right now, a hell of a lot weaker. Now, you have some serious advantages over other places. Unemployment here is ridiculously low. You have to kidnap people from other places and bring them here. Invite them here in July when the weather's gorgeous and say, this weather's like 12 months a year. Bring them in from Puerto Rico where they're desperate to leave. Buy them one-way tickets, as many as you want. Bring your family, friends. You'll love it here. It's just like home. And then buy winter boots or something. When things decline that fast, the likelihood of a recession's high. No guarantees. The recession won't be awful if we have we don't have a recession. The difference won't be that big. But these suggest the other thing in your favor is agriculture. Farmers this year in 2022, I guess last year, made more money in real terms than they have since 1973. Because every price has gone up. How well it will do in 2023 is anyone's guess, but it won't go back to what it was in 2017 or 16 or 18, those famine, rotten, crappy years, right? Let's wrap it up. The 2023 will deteriorate over time. The question is how much it will deteriorate. I suspect that by Q3, we're already into a recession. Not a deep one, but we're in one. That the Fed will keep raising rates through Q1 at least 2 more times a quarter point. Hopefully they stop. And the question is how long will they keep it at that rate before they begin to drop it? Growth will soon slow down meaningfully. It may well stop. Job growth for sure. Inflation has peaked beyond question. It's the core inflation. It's that service inflation. It's energy minus goods, minus energy, minus food, that minus shelter that really matters, and the Fed will talk about. Service spending is recovering rapidly. Last but not least, follow inventories of whatever business you're in. As they go up, price appreciation will fall. Look at unemployment. As it rises, you will have more power over your employees and you will screw them with more ease. Last but not least, inflation will come down more. It's how fast and how deeply it comes down that's the real question. Last but not least, this is my name, my cell number, my phone number, my Twitter handle, and my email address. I put out 70 words 5 days a week on the economy. No graphs, no ads, no charts, no links, no photos. The easiest way to get it, text the word bow tie, one word, no hyphen, no space, to the 5-digit number 66866. Be prompted for an email address. You'll hear from me every day until you die. I'll be answering questions here one-on-one with all of you until the last person's had their questions answered. It's been a privilege being here. Thank you very much. I hope I've given you some insights into the economy.